Statistics show that a large percentage of asylum seekers who appear in court are not required by the state to pay court costs, and most of those who are required fail to do so. We spoke with Yonatan Yacoubovic, the Executive Director of the Israel Immigration Policy Center.
So we received very interesting statistics from the Ministry of Interior regarding the enforcement of court fees in the Immigration Tribunal. What we see is that in the first case, the judges barely put the court fees on migrants who file cases in those courts. Only 13% of the cases that were declined were required to pay fees. But the more significant statistic is that even out of that very low number, 81% of the migrants never actually paid their fees. And the small percentage that did pay their fees, over 70% of them were migrants who asked for an interim verdict, so they had to deposit sum of money beforehand. So the money was, so the government collected the fee from that money that was deposited, and a very, very low number, only 16 cases out of over 3,000 paid of their own volition. So what we're seeing is that de facto, while the state pays every single time it loses, the migrants almost never pay court fees. And of course that is a very large factor for the very steep rise in number of immigration cases we're seeing in Israel. Since 2014, the numbers have risen by over 100%, and this is one of the reasons that there's a great financial incentive to file petitions, even if they have no legal merit, knowing that there is no consequence to losing.
What was the court actually discussing, though?
Well, these are all immigration cases. It goes from petitions against the state's decisions to decline asylum requests, to humanitarian requests, to marriage, to citizenship through marriage immigration. The vast majority are bogus claims. Only 6% yearly, in 2018 at least, only 6% of the claims were actually accepted by the court. The vast majority were declined, and another percentage were erased for different reasons. And even though only 6% of the claims were accepted, still we see a massive rise in the number of court cases, ranging from endless reasons. Migrants from Nigeria who fear ghosts in their village, to migrants from Ukraine who claim refugee status because they're deaf, and in Kiev they will receive not good reception. Endless claims, the vast majority with no legal merit whatsoever, but it allows the migrants. These cases can take half a year to 2 years to conclude, and then they can file endless appeals. And in almost all cases, they'll never pay expenses, so it's just a way for them to be able to stay in the country and continue working while their cases are filed.
So what's the solution then? How can the state ensure that the migrants are forced to pay costs?
Right, so it's very important that we enforce it, both for the states, for the state interest, and also for the migrants who have real clauses, and their cases take much longer because the courts are filled with these bogus claims. The way to do it is to require the judges to require from the migrants to pay court cases when they lose them, except if there's special circumstances, but it should be the default that they have to pay. And the second thing is, except for specific cases, let's say asylum requests where a migrant is unrepresented by a lawyer and clearly has no money, they should be demanded to put a deposit before filing the case. knowing that if they lose, the state will be able to collect the money from the deposit. And as we see that over 70% of the migrants that do pay, and it's a very small number, pay because they deposited the money. But today the situation is that you're only required to deposit money if you're asked for an interim verdict. So it should be the default that all cases must deposit money. And that will deter people who don't have legal claims. And of course there should be a situation where people who really don't have any money, even to pay for a lawyer, then they should be allowed an exception. We have to find a way where we don't block access to the court for people who really need it, but we don't allow this endless abuse of our system.
On a separate but related question, when we talked about a month and a half ago, we talked about the possibility of voluntary repatriation of Sudanese migrants as part of the normalization process emerging between Israel and Sudan. Has there been any movement on this front?
Well, it seems like there is no actual movement. We're also in election times. I also think they're changing maybe with the government, with the presidential elections in states, the change of governments. I think things are maybe moving at a different pace. But the facts stay the same. Over 6,000 Sudanese have returned to their country over the years. Of course, now that Israel has relations with Sudan, any claim that there's danger just for being in Israel is irrelevant anymore. And we see the highest courts in the land, like the European Court of Human Rights and the UK Upper Tribunal, saying that the vast majority of Sudanese, even people who are originally from areas like Darfur, can return to Sudan of their own volition. We do have the issue of the COVID and the problem of transportation and the closed borders, but I think that once we see the vaccination working and borders opening back up, and even migrants themselves receiving the vaccination, there really is no impediment for the return of the vast majority of them.
Yonatan Yacobovich, Executive Director of the Israel Immigration Policy Center. Now, Eric.